Imagine absolute, thick darkness. Not the kind that descends at night in a city apartment when the electricity goes out and your eyes gradually adjust to the outlines of furniture. No, this is a different darkness. It is dense, palpable, like black velvet pressed against your face. There is not a single photon of light in it, except for the dim, trembling beam of an oil lamp that smokes and threatens to go out with any sudden movement of air. The air here is heavy, damp, saturated with the smell of sulfur, sweat, and wet stone. It feels as if the earth itself is pressing down on your shoulders with the force of thousands of atmospheres. In this darkness, only two sounds are heard: the heavy, hoarse breathing of a human and the rhythmic, dull thud of metal against stone. Thud, pause, the rustle of crumbling rock. Thud, pause, rustle. This is the heartbeat of Donbass, which they are trying to restart after clinical death. We are several hundred meters underground, in a narrow drift where one cannot stand upright. The person swinging the pickaxe is not a mighty hero from pre-war posters. It is a woman, or perhaps a teenager, barely 14 years old. On the surface above their heads, the earth trembles. Up there, artillery cannons roar, shells whistle, and bomber engines howl. Up there, the greatest confrontation in human history is taking place. But here, in the depths of the planet, a different, invisible, but no less fierce battle is being fought. A battle for energy. A battle to ensure that distant factories in the Urals do not stop, that steel continues to melt in blast furnaces, that tank armor remains strong. This is a story about people who extracted black stone, more valuable than gold, caught between the hammer of war and the anvil of the underground elements. To understand the scale of this feat, one must transport oneself to 1941. As the front relentlessly rolled eastward, it became clear that the country's industrial heart could not be held. The evacuation of industry was an unprecedented operation in its scale. But a mine cannot be loaded onto a railway platform and taken beyond the Volga. Coal seams, complex ventilation systems, underground horizons, all of this remained for the enemy. And then the most difficult, tragic decision was made. What cannot be removed must not fall into enemy hands. The mines were disabled. Headframes were blown up. Shafts were flooded. Drifts were collapsed. This was a scorched earth tactic applied to the subsoil. When enemy troops entered the region, they found not a flourishing industrial cluster, but ruins. During the years of occupation, despite all attempts by German engineers and forced labor of the local population, industrial-scale mining could not be restored. Donbass was silent. Its underground veins were severed and its arteries filled with water. However, by the autumn of 1943, the situation had changed dramatically. Soviet troops, during the fierce Donbass offensive, liberated the region. The scene that greeted the liberators was grim. The country's main coal basin lay in ruins. Almost all surface structures had been destroyed by the retreating enemy. Power plants were blown up. But the worst was hidden deep underground. The mines were gigantic subterranean lakes. Millions of cubic meters of water filled the workings. It seemed impossible to restore this even in decades. Western experts assessing the damage wrote in their newspapers that Donbass, as an industrial unit, had ceased to exist, and that it would take the Russians at least 20 years just to pump out the water. But history, like the Soviet command, did not have 20 years to spare, and not even 20 months. The situation on the front and in the rear was paradoxical. The Urals, which had become the new industrial backbone of the state, was suffocating. Evacuated factories were working at their limit, producing tanks, cannons, and airplanes. But high-quality armor steel required coke, and the best coke came precisely from Donbas coals. The Kuznetsk coal basin, located in Siberia, was working to the point of exhaustion, but its capacities were insufficient, and the logistical arm was too long. Railways were overloaded with troop and equipment trains, and transporting coal across the entire country became an unaffordable luxury. Industry needed Donbas coal, here and now, immediately. It is at this point that the external conflict of global strategy and the internal tragedy of the small person converge. The order of the State Defense Committee was brief and categorical: restore production at any cost. But who would restore it? Experienced miners, strong men who knew every seam and every turn of the drift, were at the front. Many of them had joined miner divisions as early as 41. Those who remained under occupation were exhausted. Many did not survive hunger and repression. Who would go down into the mine face? The answer to this question became one of the most poignant pages of this story. Those who should not have been there went into the mine face: women, girls, teenagers, elderly pensioners who had long since said goodbye to the pickaxe. It was a world turned upside down. Traditionally, mining was considered exclusively a man's job due to the extreme physical demands. But the war erased gender boundaries. Women's brigades were formed. Girls who, before the war, dreamed of becoming teachers, doctors, or seamstresses, put on coarse robes, took up heavy tools, and descended into the damp darkness. This was not coercion in its pure form. It was an impulse born of the understanding of a simple truth: if there is no coal, there will be no steel. If there is no steel, there will be no tanks. If there are no tanks, the enemy will return. The working conditions in the first months after liberation can only be described as primitive. There was practically no mechanization. Coal cutters, conveyors, electric locomotives, all of it was destroyed or taken away. The restorers had only picks, shovels, crowbars, and their own hands at their disposal. But the main enemy was water. To get to the coal, they first had to drain the levels. There was a catastrophic shortage of pumps. Those sent from the Urals were installed off the wheels, without foundations, directly on the mud. But often, water had to be scooped out with buckets, passed along a chain. Imagine a living conveyor of hundreds of people standing knee-deep or even waist-deep in icy, oily sludge, who for days on end passed heavy buckets upwards. It was a battle with physics, with hydrostatic pressure, with nature itself, which tried to reclaim the voids gnawed out by man. However, the external enemy had not disappeared either. Although the front line had moved west, the sky remained dangerous. German aviation continued raids on industrial facilities and railway hubs. Miners worked under the constant threat of bombings. Air raid sirens wailed over the spoil heaps day and night. But if on the surface one could try to hide in a shelter, underground there was nowhere to run. In the event of a direct hit by a bomb on the mine shaft or the headframe, the people below were trapped. Ventilation shut down, cages got stuck. Every shift could be the last, not only because of collapses or gas, but also because of the war, which continued to knock on their door. Here we come to the second layer of conflict, the internal psychological one. How can a person withstand such tension? What made a 16-year-old girl whose head spun from malnutrition go down into the mine again and again, tie a sled with coal to herself, and crawl through a narrow passage, rubbing her knees raw? It was a phenomenon of collective will. Personal ambitions, fears, and weaknesses receded before the common misfortune. There were diaries and memoirs from those years that described not so much fear as monstrous fatigue. People slept right at the mine shafts, on heaps of waste rock, so as not to waste time on the way home. The mine became home. This was especially vividly manifested in the phenomenon of competition. It would seem, what kind of competition could there be when it was a struggle for survival? But the brigades competed fiercely, passionately. It was not a race for diplomas or medals, although they also mattered. It was a race for life. Every ton of coal brought to the surface was perceived as a shot at the enemy. In the minds of these people, a piece of anthracite transformed into a shell flying towards Berlin. This gave their arduous labor a higher meaning. They were not just digging the earth, they were forging victory. The internal conflict also lay in overcoming technical illiteracy. Yesterday's housewives and school children had to master complex professions in the shortest possible time. Coal miner, timberer, hoist operator. Mistakes here were costly. An incorrectly installed timbering, a collapse, a spark in a gassy drift, an explosion. Old masters recalled from retirement became mentors. This was a unique generational connection. Grandfathers taught grandchildren how to listen to the earth, how to recognize danger by the sound of crackling wooden props, how to detect methane without instruments. But there was also a third, deeper, philosophical layer to this confrontation. It was a conflict between destruction and creation. War is essentially a process of entropy, chaos, the transformation of ordered structures into ruins. Mining, on the contrary, is creation, the extraction of resources for life, for warmth, for light. Working under shelling, these people affirmed the right of life to exist despite the logic of death. They restored a complex technical system in conditions where civilization itself was crumbling around them. This is a paradox. To defeat the machine of destruction, it was necessary to create a machine of creation in the epicenter of devastation. The key moment, the transformation of the entire narrative, was the transition from manual labor to the first signs of the restoration of large industry. This did not happen overnight, but the turning point was physically palpable. From the Urals, from Siberia, from Central Asia, echelons arrived in Donbass, not only with timber for props, but also with pumps, winches, and transformers. The entire country, itself experiencing colossal need, gave its last to start the heart of Donbass. The moment of truth, the climax of this epic, came in the winter of 1944. The front had moved far away, but the need for coal only increased, decisive offensive operations requiring colossal amounts of equipment were being prepared. During this period, an event occurred that can be called a technological miracle. It was possible to drain and launch several key, deepest mines that were considered hopelessly lost. When the first echelons with high-quality coking coal went to the metallurgical giants of Magnitogorsk and Nizhny Tagil, it was a triumph comparable to winning a major battle. Factory directors sent telegrams to Donbass in which dry, bureaucratic language was replaced by words of sincere, tearful gratitude. Metallurgists wrote, "Dear ones, thank you for the coal. The furnaces are breathing." This success came at a steep price. People worked 2 and sometimes 3 shifts in a row. There are countless stories of brigades refusing to surface until they met their quota, even when the electricity went out and the fans stopped. They worked by the light of headlamps, in suffocating heat. It's important to understand that many of these heroes were children, 13 and 14-year-old boys and girls who were shorter than a shovel handle. They had to stack boxes to reach the control levers of the mechanisms. Their hands, still childlike, grew coarse and were covered in ingrained coal dust, which remained with them for life, like a tattoo of memory. The transformation of consciousness also occurred at the leadership level. If at the beginning of the war a rigid command system prevailed, where a person was regarded as a cog, then during the restoration of Donbass, an understanding of the value of human initiative emerged. Rationalizers appeared, who, in the absence of spare parts, came up with incredible engineering solutions. Working pumps were assembled from scrap metal, and tractors were made from the remains of damaged military equipment. This was a triumph of Russian ingenuity, multiplied by desperate necessity. One should also note the role of women, which is central to this story. Legendary women's brigades, such as Maria Grishutina's brigade and others, became a symbol of the era. They didn't just replace men, they often exceeded pre-war male production norms. This caused shock and disbelief even among experienced miners. How could a fragile woman hack 10, 15, 20 tons of coal per shift with a jackhammer that weighed almost as much as she did? The secret was not in physical strength, but in strength of spirit and, strangely enough, in rhythm and technique. Women brought their own special plasticity and perseverance to hard labor. They knew that their husbands were at the front, and every swing of the pickaxe brought their reunion closer. The ideological conflict reaches its peak here. On one side, the ideology of Nazism, which considered Slavic peoples incapable of complex organization and technical creativity, predicting decades of savagery for Donbass. On the other side, the reality in which these incapable people, women and children, raised from the ruins in a matter of months what German engineers failed to launch in 2 years. This was proof of the superiority not only of the economic system, but also of the very spirit of the people. At that time, labor safety often took a back seat, and that is a tragic part of the truth. Coal was indeed extracted at a cost that is terrifying to voice. Accidents were frequent. Roof collapses, methane explosions, water breakthroughs. The official reports of that time did not write about this, but in the memory of the mining villages, these tragedies remained forever. People died at their posts, just like soldiers in a trench. And the attitude towards the deceased was the same, as fallen heroes. They were buried with honors, and their place at the coalface was taken by others the next day. No one fled, no one abandoned their work. It was a state of total mobilization of conscience. By the end of the war, in 1945, coal production in Donbass reached a level that allowed it to fully meet the needs of the front and the rear. This was an economic miracle unparalleled in world history. No coal basin in the world that had undergone such total destruction recovered at such a speed. The lessons we can learn from this story today resonate with incredible power. The first lesson is an understanding of the limit of human capabilities, or rather, the absence of this limit. When there is a higher goal, when the survival of the people is at stake, a person is capable of actions that seem fantastic in peacetime. The second lesson is the importance of the home front. We are used to studying the history of wars by battle maps, by the movement of arrows on staff plans. But these arrows were moved by the energy of coal and oil. Without the feet in the dark, wet coal face, there would be no victory banner over the Reichstag. This unbreakable link between the front and the rear shows that victory is forged not only by weapons, but also by labor. Another important aspect of the resonance is the role of women in history. Donbass of the 40s showed that a woman is capable of bearing the burden of an entire industry on her shoulders without losing her humanity, her ability to love and hope. This is a monument to female courage, not cast in bronze, but carved in coal seams. And finally, a technological lesson. The restoration of Donbass showed the importance of improvisation, flexibility of thought, and engineering daring. In conditions of scarcity of everything, people found solutions that were ahead of their time. This is an example of how crisis becomes a catalyst for development. Concluding this story, we once again return to the darkness of the mine shaft. But now this darkness does not seem frightening or hopeless. We see how the lights of the cap lamps are lit in it. We see the faces of people, grimy, with white circles around their eyes from protective glasses, tired to the limit, but glowing with inner strength. We see the cage rising to the surface, and these people emerge into the sun. They squint from the bright light, inhale the fresh steppe air smelling of wormwood, and look at the horizon. There, on the horizon, the chimneys of restored factories smoke. Trains loaded with black gold run. This cycle, from immersion in the darkness of destruction to rising into the light of creation, is a metaphor for the entire path the people traversed in those terrible years. The coal they extracted with their own hands burned in furnaces, disappearing, transforming into heat and energy. But the energy of their feet never vanished. It is dissolved in our present-day life, in every steel beam, in every bridge, in the foundation of our existence. The heroic miners of Donbass, who worked under shelling, proved that even underground, beneath tons of rock, under the enemy's guns, a person can remain unbroken. They didn't just extract coal, they extracted the future. And every time we turn on the light or see a steel structure, somewhere deep in history, the dull thud of a pickaxe against rock echoes, reminding us of the price that was paid for this light. Therefore, the next time you hear the word Donbass, remember not only the dry news reports. Remember that girl with the sled in the narrow adit. Remember the water rising to their throats. Remember the echelons disappearing into the snowy expanse of the Urals. This is a memory that must not fade, just as anthracite, holding the sunlight of distant epochs within it, does not fade. This is our eternal flame, burning not in a square but deep underground, warming the memory of generations. Their labor became the foundation upon which a vast country stood, and this foundation, mixed with coal and courage, proved stronger than granite. The history of Donbass's recovery is not just a chapter in an economics textbook. It is a hymn to the human spirit, capable of transforming black stone into the light of victory. And this light continues to reach us through the decades, reminding us that there are no depths from which a people cannot rise to the summit if they are united by a common goal and faith in their righteousness.